You're listening to the Reecie Colbert Show on Urban View.
Welcome back to the Reecie Colbert Show here on SiriusXM Urban View. This month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and you know that I want to bring all the experts to talk about these issues. And so I'm so happy and so honored to be joined by the author of the memoir, No Longer Silent, Terace Garnier. Hey, girl, hey.
Hi, Reecie. Thank you so much for having me and raising awareness about this very, very important issue.
Absolutely. I mean, you are such a courageous voice out there telling your story, which is so powerful. Your memoir, No Longer Silent, is such just a compelling and inspirational read. I know that the topic is heavy, but the read of it, I think that there are so many powerful takeaways and tools that people can get from it. But before we get into all of that, give folks an idea of who you are and you know what brings you to the show to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
So my name is Terace Garnier, and I was a journalist. I guess I'm still a journalist. You never take that hat off. You're always a journalist. And so I was in the military as a broadcast journalist, the Air Force. And then once I got out of the military, I became a journalist in the civilian world. So I worked for a couple different networks, and then I went to local news, and then I came back to DC where I was a Pentagon correspondent, and I did that until about May of 2022. And so since that time frame, you know, there was a pandemic, and I had a lot of family members that I lost during the pandemic. I mean, I literally had 7 members in 1 month.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it was a lot. And so as a result, I said, I need to take a step back and start prioritizing what's important. And what was important was spending more time with family and also showcasing my book to try to help other survivors deal with their mental health concerns that come up with issues that spring up from experiencing those kind of traumas and how they could start their healing journey. And so those were my main missions over the last 2 years. And so thankfully, I was able to publish a book. I've been able to go and speak across the country to different people about their concerns and encourage them to no longer be silent. Use your voice, take your power back, and know that I hear you, I understand you, and you are not alone. And so I'll actually show you my book here. So
yes.
My book, No Longer Silent. And I actually published it on Veterans Day of 2020. And that was the 10-year anniversary of me surviving being assaulted in the military. And so I thought it was very important to publish it on that day because normally every Veterans Day was not a good experience for me.
Right.
And so I thought I can take my power back and give it something that I can look forward to every Veterans Day from here on out if I publish this book showcasing what I overcame. And so that's kind of what led me to publishing the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's reclaiming your power is such a powerful thing because part of sexual assault is exerting power and making you feel powerless. How can folks, before we get more into the conversation, I just want to make sure that people know how they can get your book, No Longer Silent.
Absolutely. So I'm selling it on my website, which is www.terace, Terace, Garnier, Garnier.com. Now, I know a lot of times they want to autocorrect it and add an extra R in my first name, so it sounds like Terace. But
yeah.
And so they can find it there. And I'm also on Instagram as well. So they can follow me on at Miss_T_Garnier, Garnier. Or the other page I have is at No Longer Silent, the book. Also.
Okay.
Yep. So
No Longer Silent, the book. Okay. People should be able to remember that.
Yep, it's pretty easy. So I tell people, please reach out if you want a copy, let me know. And a lot of times people will get the book and then share their stories with me. So I have an open door policy. And I always tell people anything they tell me, I don't repeat to anyone else unless they're talking about harming themselves or others. But I want to be that person that if they feel they just want to vent or they want to get some advice, that I can be that person to help. So I always encourage people, even if they just reach out to me to want to share their stories or have someone to speak to, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a beautiful offer. And, you know, people need the support because there is so much stigmatizing around victims of assault, sexual assault, or any kind of assault and domestic violence One of the things that struck me so much about your book and your experience is, um, and correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, but the lack of justice that you received around your assault and even what happened to you as a child. You're so good at giving people tips on how to work through and navigate through the process of reclaiming their power. Can you talk to those in particular who, and I'm not saying that justice is a consolation, even if somebody was locked up behind bars or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that it'll make it a consolation. But what do you say to those who don't have, a person that they're not looking over their shoulder, or a person that they feel like can't do this to somebody else? How do they move through the healing process? And is a healing process the right word? I mean, do you ever really heal from it? Like, give me some insight on that.
So there is a healing process. And I like to tell people you have to put a lot of work in. It's not something that's easy. And so I always tell people go to counseling. When you go to counseling, do not set these unrealistic deadlines for yourself. So you may say, okay, within the next year, I'm going to be healed. That's not how it works. Everyone's different. And so some people, it may take a year, others, it may take decades. You never know. And so I always encourage people, go to counseling, seek help, but don't put this pressure on yourself that you have to be cured, so to speak, in a year or two. Because I've been going to therapy since 2013. And to be honest with you, I think I will continue to go to it for the rest of my life. And it's not just because of what happened to me. I think therapy is great for even just day-to-day issues that come up, but especially for those that are going through trauma and they feel they're alone. You can go speak to a counselor. They're going to give you great advice. You don't have to worry about them going and telling other people what you told them. You don't have to worry about them getting tired of hearing you talk about it. Because a lot of people will go to family members and friends. Family members and friends may not give you the best advice. They may not be available to talk to you when you need it. Or they may just frankly get tired of you talking about it. So in order to start your own healing journey, I always recommend that people do that. You can heal from it, but you won't forget it. So I don't want people to think that, it's like me getting hypnotized and I'm never going to remember anything. No, that's not how that works. But at least if you start the healing journey, you can heal yourself to where it's just like a scar at that point. You see it, you know what caused the scar, but now you can look at it and say, I overcame that. This is a story of triumph right here of how I got this scar. And so that's one of the ways that I like to encourage people.
One other thing that was striking is initially, for instance, when you experienced your assault, you had already been an advocate for sexual assault victims, but you were hesitant to come forward. And, and you can talk about that process and what ended up coming about from it. So much of these cases go unreported, and people wonder why people didn't speak up. In hindsight, would you say, and I think I know the answer to this, but for the audience, would you say that it's still worth it? Even if the result doesn't necessarily end in, let's say, a conviction, or it doesn't end in the kinds of things that we think of when people come forward and alert authorities to an assault that has happened?
I would say it was worth it only because if I can help other people who have gone through this heal, if I can protect a child from having to go through this, or help a child who has gone through this, then everything that I went through is worth it. But I will say, and this is tying back into your question about justice, I don't feel that I received the justice that I deserved. And I try to tell people, don't do it for that reason, because you may never get that justice you're seeking. Do it because you want to heal yourself. Karma is a real thing. Whether the justice system gets them or not, karma will. And I'm a firm believer in that. And so my most important message that I want to spread is do it for yourself. Because when you bottle all that trauma up and you don't deal with it, it starts impacting you physically and mentally, whether you think it does or not. So do it for your own healing. Put yourself first. This is how you take your power back. This is how you don't allow them to control your life any longer, by healing yourself so you can move on and live a fruitful life where they're not impacting you any longer.
Now, what do you say to those who made the choice to not come forward, not report, and maybe they're carrying guilt or they're carrying shame around it, that they should have done something to report it, or they might wonder about, well, what, is this happening to somebody else because I didn't step forward? What kind of message would you send?
There's a lot of reasons why people won't come forward and report whatever situation they may have gone through. They may feel that their life's in danger. There's many layers to it. Maybe they have children and they don't want to put their children in danger. I'm gonna give you a perfect example. The man that assaulted me as a child, I was considering going to the police and having them reinvestigate this again 20 plus years later. What stopped me from doing it was the fact that when I was a teenager, he called my grandmother. Called my grandmother. She put me on the phone because she didn't know who he was. And he said to me, I know where you live. I'm coming for you. I don't want to stir the pot because he still has my grandmother's address.
Oh my goodness.
If I tried to take this to court, one, more than likely I'd probably lose because of the statutes of limitations. Two, now he's going to know where I live and what I'm doing. If they want to, put a restraining order, they have to give him an address of where not to go. So now he could have his friends come harass me. His friends do things to me. But my biggest concern was I don't want him going after my family. I know he would do. So survivors, there's a lot of reasons why they won't come forward. And so I always encourage them to go speak to somebody and seek advice on what's the best options for your situation. Because at the end of the day, I would never want to tell someone, no, go speak up and talk about it. And now their family member gets hurt as a result of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think situations are different. But I think the important thing is for people to know that there are so many resources available. And that's one of the biggest concerns for people who are going through domestic violence or sexual assault. They don't know what resources are available to them. And so that's why they don't seek those things out or get the help that they deserve, because they don't even know what's available to them. So I try to encourage others to do some research, see what different programs are available to you, try to go speak to a counselor. And also, I think what is also helpful, if you can remove yourself from that situation, find something that takes your mind off of what happened. For me, it was snowboarding.
Okay.
I snowboarded in my life and I said, I want to try this out, and I fell in love with it. So start a painting, class, do a wine and paint night, or, bake cookies, whatever gets your mind off of it. I think those are some steps that the person can take themselves that doesn't involve others, that can kind of help in that healing journey. But I personally believe that the more we speak up about this, the more it's going to stop pedophiles from doing this, because they're going to be scared to do it if they think we're going to tell on them. And it's going to help release a lot of that pent up anger, frustration, hurt, pain, all those things. It's going to help release it so it'll stop taking or wreaking havoc on your body.
You said so many incredibly powerful things in there. With this being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it's so striking how unprotected survivors are, whether it's a child, whether it's a woman. It's so striking how you've already been subjected to unspeakable violence against your body, and you have to continue to protect yourself long after the act and protect your family, and making choices that may deprive you of justice. I do want to say, though, to anybody out there, what happens after the act is not on you if you don't speak up. It's not on you if the person does this to somebody else. That's on them. And unfortunately, we live in a society that doesn't make it easy to stop somebody like that because of how it treats women and how it treats children. It's just, it's so disheartening. But I'm glad that you gave some suggestions that are, one, around joy, because that is one way you can get back to yourself. But can you tell me just a couple of resources that that off the top of your head that men are victims of domestic violence as well and assault. What kind of resources do you trust? Are there any particular organizations that you trust that you would hands down without hesitation recommend for people to seek out?
I would say RAIN. They're a great program that helps survivors of sexual assault as well as domestic violence. I would also say the Pink Berets. They help service members and veterans and first responders who have experienced those different traumas. There's so many more different resources that are available. And so those are the two that I know of. But I always encourage others to definitely do some research into that. A lot of churches will know of programs that can help those who are domestic violence survivors or sexual assault survivors. So I always encourage that as well. And just pouring back into yourself. That is the biggest thing, because I think as survivors, one, a lot of times they'll think this is my fault. I brought this upon myself, and they'll beating themselves up and abusing themselves. You were just abused by someone, and now you're abusing yourself again as punishment for you being abused. And I've never understood that cycle, but I think it's in a way of some form of control. They feel they can control that. So that's why they do those things.
Yeah.
But it's destructive. And what happened to you is not your fault. And I think tying back into a comment you just made earlier, it's a societal issue. The fact that we grow up and we're told, don't walk down a dark alley because you could be assaulted. Don't be drunk at a club because you could be assaulted. Don't wear a short skirt or something provocative because you could be assaulted. When really what should be being taught is, don't do these things to people.
Right.
Here's how to protect yourself from it happening. And so we need to change how society views this, because a lot of assaults aren't happening at the club after you had a drink or two. I know of a fact, there was a case that was just settled where the archdiocese is paying millions to people who were assaulted by priests. They weren't at the club getting crunk. They were at church praying to Jesus and getting molested afterwards.
My God.
So people cannot say that this is just put it in a box and this only happens to these kind of people, because you have children going through this, you have the elderly going through this, you have teenagers, and it doesn't matter, man or woman, people are experiencing this. And so it's so important for society to stop saying that you brought it upon yourself, or it's your job to protect yourself from the rapist. How about we teach people not to be rapists? How about we teach them not to assault people? How about we teach everyone how to handle their emotions? A good, nurturing way, so that way you don't have people who want to take power over people and do these horrible things, and then you don't have the people who have to suffer from it. So I think it's also by us speaking about this and making it more normalized that people are talking about their traumas, that society will start to change. Their perspectives and how they define it and how they treat it will begin to change. But that won't start until people start speaking up. We have to speak up.
Yes, yes. I want to continue this conversation because I have a lot to respond to in what you just said, especially about how a picture is painted of who victims are, survivors are, whichever terminology you use, to justify inaction on it, to justify being dismissive of an epidemic of violence. So I definitely want to comment on that.
Well, look, I just want to make one real quick comment.
Yeah.
When I say society, look who's running for president. The man was convicted for doing what we're talking about, yet he's running for president. How can we expect anybody to take this issue seriously if we literally have a man who is known for doing it, who's running for president? To me, it's heartbreaking. I don't understand that. Yeah. And so this issue is going to continue to be an issue if we allow people like that to run the country. How does that make any sense? And any country, any planet, how does that make sense? As a survivor, it's baffling to me. I don't understand that. And to be frank, it's very disheartening, because now, what if he gets back in office? I'm not going to be able to tell my story the way I want to or help encourage others. People are going to be too scared to, because they're going to be like, well, look at the president of the country. He was able to do it. So now it's going to be a free for all. And I'm not trying to be extreme, and I know wasn't trying to be political, but this is what we're dealing with.
Yes. Yes.
This is what we're dealing with. So, and I'm sorry, that was my little tangent, but
No. It's 100% justified, and it goes back to how this society does not care about the safety of women. The fact that, to your point, a man who has been civilly convicted and found guilty of sexual assault and has had to pay nearly $100 million between the assault and defamation, because not only did he assault her, but he defamed her character, is still allowed to not only just run for president, but according to the polls, be tied with a prosecutor, a woman who is the vice president of the United States. It just goes to show the depravity that we have in our society towards the safety of women. Again, it goes to your point about blaming women when these things happen to them, as though it was something in their behavior that made this happen. And well, maybe it isn't really how you said it is. Maybe it's a misinterpretation or a miscommunication or whatever the situation may be. But it should be disqualifying. It should be disqualifying. And I might be controversial here, but if it was a man who would accuse him of sexual assault, he will be 0% of the polls, because there have been situations where we've seen where there have been people, and I don't have to name them down, but there have been people who had been accused of being sexual predators, and the energy was all team them, and well, y'all just trying to bring somebody down and whoa. But then when male victims came forward, all of a sudden it was the mute challenge. Nobody was coming to their defense. That was all, you just trying to bring down such and such and such. And so and it's not okay to happen to men either. Be clear, I'm not suggesting that. But my whole point is that people too often don't care about what women experience. They don't care about the violence. That's why we have these abortion bans that don't make exceptions for rape and incest. And you have a vice presidential candidate that says, well, two wrongs don't make a right. So it's part of a pattern that is so insidious and so preventable. I mean, we don't have to make these choices to be this way as society, just like we don't have to be the society that has AR-15s and mass shootings in schools, in movie theaters, in grocery stores, in Walmart. We don't have to be this society that devalues women. I just want to point out to people the correlation between mass shooters and domestic violence. And the fact that we don't have a boyfriend ban, in terms of boyfriend red flag or whatever is a specific name, where if you have committed a domestic violence, you can't get a gun and a background check, because we don't have those kind of protections in place, because we're not willing to protect women when these kinds of things happen. Then that person then has more freedom to inflict violence on others, the people that now you care, when it's not a girlfriend or a wife or an ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife or a child that's being victimized. So, Terace, thank you so much for being here. I want to continue this conversation, but we got to take a break. More Reecie Colbert Show. Be right back.
This You're listening to the Reecie Colbert Show on Urban View.
Welcome back to the Reecie Colbert Show here on SiriusXM Urban View to talk about National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I am joined here by an expert on this and the author of No Longer Silent, Terace Garnier. Hey, girl.
Hey, I'm so appreciative to be here today and raise some awareness about this because this is a very, very important topic.
It really, really is. And so in the last hour, we got going towards the end about one thing in particular that I do want to expand on, which is how you talked about how they put, people in a box or make people who people can pick apart, which isn't right, but people can pick apart and find a way to dismiss what they're going through. And I think that that is something that is particularly seen when it comes to domestic violence. Domestic violence is an epidemic, and it's something that Black women are disproportionately affected by. And when we see cases come out, the first reaction is, what did she do? Or trying to pick it apart. And there's no picture of domestic violence in reality. There's a picture that is painted in terms of the movies that we see and the media that we see, and there's characters. But can you talk a little bit about how domestic violence sometimes shows up in the packages and the boxes that people aren't expecting, and how people may be unsuspecting of who these perpetrators are of domestic violence?
So let me put this into perspective for you. About 20,000 people per day call the domestic hotline. That's 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 men that will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. So it's men and women who can experience domestic violence. And the issue is, when you mentioned the box, a lot of people are experiencing this and they're not speaking about it. They're not telling others about it. And so now they're in this situation where they're trying to fend for themselves and trying to figure out how can they survive this situation. And that's the worst thing you can do, is stay in that kind of situation. Those people feel they don't have the resources that are available to them, so they stay. I have a friend who actually, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. She was a victim of domestic violence. She was dating a boyfriend who was very abusive, and a lot of us knew of it. She didn't really tell me anything about him, but every time she would bring him up or I would mention him, she would change the subject. And so I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what. And come to find out, one day they got in an argument and he showed up at her house and he shot her in the face. And so she was too scared to leave because of what he might do to her if she did, once he found her. Right. And so a lot of times you will have these cases where people don't want to leave, or they're scared that people are going to judge them or say that, well, it was your fault. Why did you start dating that guy? Like, was there no red flags that he was violent? I got those kinds of questions. My ex-husband tried to kill me multiple times. And the question I would always get was, well, did you not see he had issues? Why is that my responsibility? Now, what I will say, and what I tell people when that situation comes up, I knew he had anger problems, but when I met him, he was going to counseling for said anger management. So I didn't start seeing these angeral issues until 6 months down the road, right? So I knew he had that issue. I didn't know the extent of how angry he was. I did not know until the night of our wedding that my ex-husband had murdered somebody. That's how angry he gets.
Oh my goodness.
Found that out the day of our wedding. And went through with the wedding and literally filed for divorce the next day and moved to another country. That's how bad it was. A lot of people don't have that situation or that scenario where they can just leave the country, So, and unfortunately, my ex-husband followed me to Japan, beat me up, sliced my face open with an iPad, like acted crazy, threatening to kill himself. And my unit and my command knew all this stuff was going on. They knew. Right. But they were in that mindset that it's probably her. She's probably bringing this stuff on herself. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what it felt like. Well, what are you doing? Why did you ask him to come to Japan? I didn't. He showed up.
Right.
I'm here. So it was even in their questioning whether they meant to accuse me or not. They were. Well, why is he here? Why'd you bring him here? I didn't. Why'd you marry him? Did you not know he had problems? Well, I knew he had some anger problems. Yes, but he was going to therapy. And don't we all have problems? Like, I'm not going to judge the dude, based on it, if he's seeking help and actively getting help for it. And so I think that's really important for people to try to understand that everyone's situation is unique, everyone's situation is different, and there may be times that they may be too fearful to come forward. So to me, that's the community's responsibility to look out and notice if things don't seem right or things seem off. That's how we can help as a community, because they may not ever say anything, but you may see your friend come around with a black eye, you may see them come around with a broken arm. Okay, well, what can we do to help you with this situation? Because you're not telling me something's going on, but we know something's going on. And so I think that's how as a community, that we can help those who are going through that.
Yeah, and your point is so important, that domestic violence happens to people who have left. I mean, in your case, you divorced, followed you, and were still assaulted, and people will still find a way to justify what happened even when you leave. And it's a shame when protecting yourself feels like staying in a situation that is dangerous to you and that is already harmful to you. Exactly. So what do you suggest? Or, I mean, I know there's no one size fits all, right? But if you have a lot of experience in kind of providing support to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, what do people do with the fear?
And that's a tough one. I know for me, I lived in fear for a long time. I had an ex-husband stalking me. I had my rapist stalking me. And all the time I was scared to leave my house, because my ex-husband would sit outside my house. And I would call the police, and the police were like, "Oh, ma'am, we're so sorry. There's nothing we can do until he actually does something to you." I said, "Hold on a second. My ex-husband, on record, has tried to kill me multiple times. He has harmed me multiple times. I'm telling you, he's sitting outside my house staring at me, and you're telling me you can't do anything until he tries it again? Until he actually kills me this time?" What sense does that make? It makes no sense. We need to get Congress to change the laws on stalking. We need them to change different legislation on how these different things are handled. That's in legislation.
Yeah.
For the people themselves, I would say find your resources. There's multiple hotlines that you can call that will help you get away from that situation. And like you mentioned earlier, even if you get away, that doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. But I think that's the first step in getting to safety versus staying. It's almost like being in a toxic situation that eventually, maybe after so long, you'll die from it, versus the fear that if I leave, they could potentially harm me and kill me. I like the chances of, I stay here, I'll die. If I leave, the chances of that are less than if I stay. That's how my mindset.
That's the calculation that people have to make.
That's the calculation. If I stay here, they will kill me. If I leave, they could if they find me. And that's the key. That's the key, if they find you. And there's so many resources that are available. You could go to family members, have an escape plan. Have an escape plan. Hey, I know so-and-so works on these days. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have my family come over, help me pack this stuff up, and I'm going to be out. I'm going to go stay at a hotel or somewhere where they can't track me because they know my family members. Try to have some kind of plan. But I think a lot of it ties into finances.
Yeah.
Who are having these cases happen against them, they're reliant on that person, whether it's for finances, food, shelter, maybe it's the father of their children, the mother of their children. So there's a lot of layers into it when you're involving children and pets and all those other things. But if you can try to get out of the house, that is the main thing. Get away from the house.
Now, what can you tell me, if you don't mind sharing, that is? So you're dealing with being stalked. You're dealing with the fact that you don't live with this person. You have your own home, and yet you're being stalked and terrorized. There was a point where you were, I'm assuming, probably still afraid, right? But you still, is it accurate to say that there was a point where you got back to your life, or was there a process? And what clicked, or what specifically happened where you go from the cops won't help me. This person is doing this to me, to I have to find some sort of normalcy, if you could even call it that.
Oh, there was a lot of fear, a lot of sleepless nights. And I think it got so bad, and it got to the point where I said, you know what? This isn't living.
Mm.
This is not living. Not only is it not living, I got away from this person and they're still controlling me.
Mm.
I can't allow this any longer. I cannot live in fear. And so what it took was, one, I talked to my counselor about it, but two, it took me realizing that if it's my time to go, it's my time to go, no matter what I do. So I can either live my life and let whatever that thing is happen, or I can waste my life away hiding in a house and never leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Dying a slow death. That's a slow, torturous death because you're not living. You're literally fearful of everything. And so at that point, I said, you know what? If my ex-husband's going to come harm me, he's going to do it. I'm going to be at least living my life. If he tries to do that, I cannot. He's already taken years away from me, and the abuse that he caused upon me, the fear that he caused, the fact that I won't even have children now because of him. He's taken so much away from me. I refuse to allow him to take any more away from me. I'm going to live my life. And if that means I'm in danger, so be it. Because at that point, it's on him. It's not on me. I have life. And I know that's really hard to tell people who are in a situation where they have people who are threatening them and harming them. But at the end of the day, do you want to live like you're in a war zone all the time and be fearful and scared to be yourself and have fun and laugh? Do you want to live like that? Because that's not living. It isn't. I'd rather escape and have a few months where I'm living my life. I'm not fearful and I'm having a great time. And, if something happens, then at least I got to live versus just being in fear. That's not living. It is, Now, granted, I don't have kids involved in a lot of situations. They have kids involved, but even for the kids,
Yeah.
can't live like that. That's a toxic environment. And then when they get older and they start to have their families, they won't even know how to start a family because they don't even know what a normal, healthy family relationship is because they just grew up living in a household where all they saw was dysfunction and abuse. And that could potentially continue. Now you got a generational thing going on now, and it passes down generations. You have to be the person that stops it. And I hate to say that because as a survivor, we have already gone through enough. We just want to be able to live our lives. But unfortunately, that's not how society works. You still have to keep fighting even after you.
I'm glad that you were able to come to that, but I hate that what you had to come to terms with was the possibility that you might die. Not that the possibility, it's not like, oh, you don't have a story in which it's the police came, took him away, never had to worry about him for the rest of my life. You had a story where you had to make the decision that even with these risks, I just have to take it. I hate that that's what you had to go through, but it is such a real answer. It is such a real answer because we know that there are so many people out there that cavalry may not be coming. And then, so what happens if the cavalry isn't going to ride in? What is the thought process? What is a decision that you have to make? And so I appreciate you so much because that is such a real answer. And it's probably closer to what the average person who has dealt with what you've dealt with or any form of violence and abuse, they probably had to make that calculation that it's not going to be the cops. It's not going to be that they're going to stop. It's going to be that I'm just going to push forward. So the last question I have is, and I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of, nitty gritty here, but you make that decision. What does it look like? Because right now I'm looking at a drop dead gorgeous, woman who is thriving. And you, like you said, you snowboard. I know you do woodworking and, you're a successful journalist and a fitness model and all kind of stuff. What happens? Like, how do you get back? How do you get there? Like, is it like the next day you're like, all right, I made the decision, boom, dive head first? Or is it more like a tiptoe and then as eventually you stop tiptoeing and you start running? Like, give me an idea of that process.
I would say, think of a leaky faucet.
Okay.
It's kind of like a drip, drip, and then it slowly gains momentum. I got to this point after 10 years.
Mm.
It wasn't overnight, and it was consistently going to therapy. I mean, even with my ex-husband, I would hear loud sounds and just jump, right? Just having to get to the point where I wouldn't jump when and to a certain extent I still kind of do. Or if I see people that look like him, not instantly having a panic attack thinking it's him coming to get me. It took years to get to that point. And I had to research where he was living to make sure he wasn't living near me, and things of that nature, which I hate that I had to do because I didn't want to give it any more attention, but I had to for my own safety.
Right.
So it was years. It was years, and staying consistent at it. I mean, it got to the point where my family didn't even believe how bad it was, right? Because he's a con artist. So he was able to convince people he was a certain way, and he was good at it. He was very good at it. And so for years, my family didn't even believe what I was telling them was going on. And then I would come to him and say, hey, look, he's stalking me. Look, he's adding me on social media. He's creating all these new accounts and adding me and messaging me, and I'll block him. Now he's got his friends calling me all hours of the day and night, calling me names. He hacked all of my accounts and my social media accounts, and he's sending messages to people about me and threatening to post my naked photos online. Like, it was literally a daily battle, daily. And I'm like, God, I just hope that if I keep ignoring him, he'll eventually get tired and give up. He has not. He still hasn't, right? Every now and then he'll still pop up, and I'm like, oh, it's like the freaking gift that just keeps giving that you never wanted to begin with, right? And so it's a constant battle of going to counseling, changing phone numbers, changing addresses, deleting people off social media. I'll give you an example. The reason why my name is Miss T Garnier on Instagram is because he kept finding my pages, following me and stalking me. So that's why I changed it to that, to make it harder, because before it was my name.
Yeah.
Those are the things I have to do just to keep him away from me. Normal people don't have to do, and so it's been a battle. But again, at the end of the day, I need to live. I have to live my life. I've had too many traumatic things happen to me. And so in order to do that, I have to constantly kind of keep my head on a swivel, but also understand that if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. I cannot live like this. And so I pray, I actually 2-3 months ago looked my ex-husband up because I was just curious. I know he had been in and out of prison. And I looked him up, and I guess he's back out of prison, and now he's married some girl, and she's got kids that aren't with him. And mind you, he messes with kids. So that was my first thought. I'm like, oh my gosh, I pray to God he's not messing with those kids. It's my first. It wasn't even about me at that point. I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope he's not messing with those kids. And I looked him up, and after that I said, okay, good. He's not going to bother me because now he has something else to fixate on.
Right.
But I think he will probably harass me the rest of my life. Every now and then he'll just pop up and do that to scare me or whatever. I'm hoping maybe eventually he'll stop. But it's been over 10 years, and he has yet to stop. So, sometimes you get in those situations. But at the end of the day, I can't control him. I can control what I do. What I'm going to do is fight for other survivors, try to help them get out these toxic situations, hopefully get them to a safe place. So then that way, once they're fully healed, they can pass it forward and start helping others. We have to start a movement of us all caring and loving on each other, helping each other get through these traumas, so that way they can help others.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your transparency. I know that it was a blessing for somebody to hear your testimony. And I think it's so important because we don't often hear from women that are still going through it, and yet still moving through life and doing things that bring them joy, that enrich them. And I think that's just such a powerful perspective, and it's a realistic one. And I think that people are going to feel affirmed by hearing your story and all of the wonderful things that you're doing. And so again, I just can't say enough how much I appreciate you coming here and giving us a perspective that I don't know if we hear a whole lot during National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And you are a survivor, you're a thriver, though. And so I'm proud of you, and I know everybody listening is going to be proud of you, and they're going to want to pick up your book, No Longer Silent, and they're going to want to share that book. And so, for people, in case they didn't hear it in the last hour, remind folks how they can follow you and support your work that you do.
So they can get a copy of my book, No Longer Silent. It's on my website, which is www.teracegarnier.com, and that's spelled Terace, Garnier, Garnier.com. And they can also find me on Instagram under @Miss MISS _ the letter T and then _ Garnier, or @No Longer Silent the book. Now, I want to point out, though, because I've had a lot of people ask me why I don't sell it on certain platforms, and I'm going to tell you, whenever I get a book order, I hand wrap each book. So it takes me about 15 minutes to do this. So I get tissue paper, and then I get these little affirmation cards. And, I have some for men and I have some for women.
Yeah.
And, I'll put a bookmark in here as well. And so when people get these, they're getting a whole package, and also not just a package, they're getting, this is my love to you. My thing is, time is the most precious thing in the world. So if I'm taking 15 minutes to wrap something to you, it's because I genuinely really care. And I know that when people have gotten my book, they said that, wow, we could tell you really care. And that's what you can't get on these other platforms. If you go, don't name it, one that starts with an A and ends with Zon, but that's why, because I want people, especially if they're getting my book, I want them to know that they are loved. They are loved. And just in me doing this, I want them to know that. So when they get the book, that's how it'll come. And usually, depending on when they place the order, I either ship it the same day or I'll ship it the next day. So they get it in the same amount of time as they would on that other platform that I mentioned earlier. But I would love the support. And also, too, I just want to briefly mention, I'm hoping now to start going to colleges, military bases, and high schools to give speeches on this. But what I'm looking for right now, I'm looking for sponsors who will buy my book in bulk. So I'm trying to find someone that can buy 1,000. The reason why I say 1,000 is because I want to go to 50 different schools, colleges, or military bases, and I want to provide these books to them for free. I feel no one should have to pay to get help for their mental health. And so if I can find sponsors that can help with that, then I can go to Howard University or go to these different schools, give a speech, and be able to give these books to them for free so they can start their own healing journeys.
That's beautiful. So how can people contribute to that if they say, I want you to, because a lot of times our audience on Urban View will say, I want to get this, but give it to somebody who could use it more than me. So how can people, is it like a Cash App or something, or would you rather just somebody reach